What's going on, everybody? Stained Glass Assassin. It's been a long time since I put a video out. It's been about, 5 months now? I think Thanksgiving time. After I made that video, things were already rough. Things kind of, went right into the toilet afterwards. So I kind of just crawled into a hole for a little bit and was dooming and glooming. But I decided to go back earlier this month and watch that video. And I thought maybe I should take my own advice because even in bad times, you got to try to find the good. And I think one of the good things is doing the things that you love. And I think for a while there, I was essentially denying myself of anything that I enjoy. And one of the things was making videos. So I decided to pull myself out of the doldrums there and get back to making some videos. And that's what I want to do. So I actually wanted to make sure I start off with the continuation of the Simpsons, the comic book guy series that we started. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to start off with issue number 4 of Bongo Comics Presents Simpsons, the comic book guy. So it's been a while. We'll do a quick little recap of issue number 3, which, if you recall, the geek nerd civil war is spiraling out of control in Springfield, to which Homer puts an end to it. And then we see that Marge essentially has mommed up the comic book shop, which drives off all the business, including Bart, to which he now has to go find a new hobby. And that hobby happens to be knitting. So that's his new hobby, and he actually falls in love with it. In the meantime, Marge and Lisa both have dreams, to which Comic Book Guy appears and informs them that he's not dead, and Lisa's not fully convinced he is dead. So she has Homer use his favor for putting an end to the Civil War. He calls in Chief Wiggum and they exhume the body and show that, that the corpse is Comic Book Guy inside. However, the issue ends with Lisa not fully convinced, so she, continues to investigate. And that's where we're going to start off in issue number 4. So let's take a look. All right, let's dive into issue number 4. So we start off with a nice full-page panel of Homer in a Ghostbusters uniform. And of course, naturally, he's going to say, "Who are you going to call?" And Bart replies, "Weight Watchers?" And we get a classic, "Why, you little..." But before Homer can successfully get his hands around Bart's neck, Bart has knitted himself a matador's cape and he "Olay." Now, Lisa points out that he's once again knitting, and this is where Bart finally comes clean and says, "Yes, all right, I admit it, I'm a knitter. I needed a new hobby when Mom took over the comic book shop and I got all creepy coming here." At this time, Homer's coming too, and he says, "Hey, you two know what I was chasing? I ran into the wall pretty hard and forgot." And Lisa's about to remind him, but Bart interjects and says, "A ghost," and he says, "All right," because he's jogged his memory, because he's come up with a plan to capture Comic Book Guy's ghosts. He says, "I've set a trap with Comic Book Guy's favorite meal, a triple crusty gutbuster burger. When he takes it, it'll turn on this high-powered vacuum cleaner and suck in his ghost." Now, I don't know about you, but this panel reminds me of 1995's Casper the Friendly Ghost, where Bill Pullman's kind of fighting back against the 3 kind of, cruel ghosts, and he actually picks up a vacuum cleaner and sucks up all 3 of them. I don't know, that's just where my mind went, but anyway... Bart is skeptical. He says, "This will never work." Lisa replies, "Because ghosts don't exist." He says, "No, because Homer will never be able to leave that burger alone." And sure enough, moments later, we see Homer chomping down on the burger, which proves that his trap might have worked if it was a ghost, but instead he got himself caught. And he says, yeah, just turn this thing off, will you, boy?" So as Bart frees him, it propels him forward and he comes face to face with what appears to be a ghost. Scared out of his mind, he literally crashes through the glass to get away, but we quickly find out it's just a cardboard cutout, an advertisement for another comic book. Now, I don't know if this is a reference, but if you remember in season 2, 3 Men in a Comic Book, that's the one where Bart, Milhouse, and Martin combine their money to buy issue number 1 of Radioactive Man. In that episode, Bart makes a reference that he thinks Casper is the ghost of Richie Rich because they look identical. Now, this ghost bears a striking resemblance to Casper, who happens to be holding a giant sack of money, and it says, "Read the adventures of Gilly, the richest ghost in the world." Again, I'm not sure if Boothby and those guys were going for a connection there, or if I've just seen too many episodes of The Simpsons, but that's what I was thinking. Anyway, with Homer out of the picture, Lisa decides to explore the back room of the comic shop, which houses a lot of the comic book guy's old memorabilia. and one of those pieces happens to be a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, as Lisa begins to open it, Bart freaks out and shields his eyes, but she assures him that it's just a replica of a movie prop. When Bart opens his eyes, it appears that Lisa's face is melted, and she has a good laugh because she points out that the prop comes with a free mask. Now, inside the Ark, they discover a bunch of journals that used to be the comic book guys, so of course they're going to read them. And that leads us to chapter 10, which is titled Secret Origins. So Lisa starts off with comic book guy's autobiography, and we see a flashback of a rich, spoiled billionaire child riding Alfie, his butler. And we see that the butler needs a break, so he says, "Very well, for being such a good horsey, go to the kitchen and make yourself a bowl of raw oats." Then we see the boy frolicking through the field, and we find out that his mommy and daddy are no longer with him. Rich boy, Alfie the butler, no mom and dad. I think you see where this is going. He runs across a danger do not enter sign and completely ignores the warning. As he's running through the field, he falls into a hole, finds himself surrounded by comic books, and then he says, "Oh no, the sound of a gentle breeze." And the comic books begin swirling around him. Obviously a nod to a young Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins. So this one ends with comic book guy holding up a giant box, and he says, "And so I trained and dedicated myself until I became more than a comic book lad. I became a comic book guy." And then at the end there it says, "Also, Alfie the butler stole all my money and went to Aruba." Now, as Lisa's ending that story, Bart comes back and says he's found another autobiography in the bathroom under the Jabba the Hutt soap dispenser. Now, this one appears to be a crossover between Gilligan's Island and Lost, because it says, "I am the only survivor of a plane that crashed into a cruise ship." And of course, we see him on an island with just a bunch of comic books, and it says, "It turns out I was stranded on one of the many comic book selling islands that were founded during the brief comic sales boom in the mid-'80s, then abandoned in the late 80s when they all went bust." And I love he's reading the infant genetically altered Tai Chi penguins. So many Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle copycats. Now, this particular story ends by saying, "I read and reread every issue until one day I was rescued by Linda Carter, who was filming an acne medicine infomercial farther down the island." Lisa and Bart begin to talk, and Bart points out another book that he finds, which in this story, comic book guy turns out really to be a robot from outer space who finds real life on Earth too boring and so spends all his time reading comic books. Naturally, Lisa's caught on, and she says, "So all these autobiographies are made up." And Bart says, "Yeah, it looks that way," but he points out that there's one more. Now, this story is peculiar because we see obviously a young comic book guy, but also another character who looks very similar to Graphic Novel Kid. Now, this one starts off with, "I spent the afternoon like most during my youth with my best friend in our chemistry set. We would try every day to find the right formula to give ourselves superpowers." And we see Graphic Novel Kid say that they need gamma radiation as seen in Incredible Hulk #1, and Comic Book Guy says lightning featured in Flash's origin Showcase Comics #4. And they argue back and forth until finally they begin slapping one another. We get a little Namor, Imperious Rex, and a little Thor, have at thee. And then unfortunately the chemistry set gets knocked over and sets the place on fire. Now the Graphic Novel Kid runs out and says, "My beard, the chemicals made me lose my facial hair, and it's all your fault." And he replies, "Oh please, you drew that thing on with a magic marker. Your chin is as bald as Charles Xavier's head." And then, "How dare you? From this day forth we are sworn enemies." And pff, big deal. It's not like you're the last friend I'll ever have. A little foreshadowing there. Fed up, Lisa slams the book shut and she says, "None of these are helping. They're all bad fan fiction." And she asks if Bart's paying attention, but he's since lost interest and he's gone back to his knitting. Now, a couple panels later, and we start off into the next chapter. Now, I want to point out that this issue, there are 2 sections dedicated to Bart's knitting and the shenanigans he gets involved with. Much like Marge's dream in the previous issue, that Little Rascal's dream, I'm only going to kind of gloss over these sections because not that they're not funny and not that they're not well written, but since they're kind of side plots, I'm not going to spend too much time on them because they don't drive the story forward. Obviously, I want you to go read the entire comic yourself. But anyhow, The story begins with groundskeeper Willie giving a sweater to Principal Skinner, and nobody knows who knitted the sweater. So once Skinner puts the sweater on, Willie gives him a swift kick to the butt. Obviously, Skinner's confused, doesn't know what's going on, and then in the next panel, we obviously see what's happening. Bart has knitted a kick me sign in his back. Eventually, he comes across Dolph, Kearney, and Jimbo and essentially invites them to follow the rules, and they proceed to literally just stomp him. I mean, it says stomp right on there. They're just putting the boots to him. So eventually, Skinner finds out what's going on, so he calls Bart down to the office and says, "Bart Simpson, this time you've gone too far. Even farther than those other times you've gone too far." And Bart says, "How do you know I did it?" And he replies, "You were the only one not kicking me. You were laughing before it even started." And he has a flashback of the teachers. You see Mr. Largo, Miss Hoover, Mrs. Krabappel, and of course, Super Nintendo Chalmers doing the same thing, just stomping him on the ground. Bart essentially confesses and says, "Okay, where's the chalk? I'll start writing on the blackboard." And Skinner says, "Not so fast, take out your needles." And we get kind of a change up of the classic chalkboard gag. Instead, we see him knitting. Again, I just kind of glossed over that, but you can see it's definitely got some humor there. We then go across town, and we see Nelson replacing the pane of glass that Homer ran through. Now, also, you remember this little side plot where Nelson has become kind of infatuated with Marge because she's kind of, shown him some motherly affection, but she can't understand why he's been hanging around the shop. So after a few panels back and forth where Marge is trying to convince him to go home, the bullies show up, and he says, "Oh, hey, guys," and they say, "Don't hey, guys, us. You're spending all your time here and totally ignoring your after-school bullying." And Jimbo points out, "Kearney's had to pick up your slack. Look how bruised his knuckles are from pounding dweebs." And Kearney says, "It's not so bad. I can always just kick more." And of course, Nelson rejects him and says, "Sorry, guys. I have a new life now, a new family." And Marge says, "No, you don't." Now, as they're leaving, basically, Jimbo says, "Fine, dude. Whatever. If you change your mind, you know where we'll be. But we're not waiting forever." Now, again, maybe I'm just reading into this too much, but this reminds me of Season 8's episode Lisa's Date with Destiny, where Lisa develops a crush on Nelson and kind of molds him into more of a gentleman, changes his clothes, his hairstyle. And there's a scene where Lisa and Nelson are having a picnic at night, and they kiss, and the bullies show up because they want to throw, rancid coleslaw at Skinner's house. But Nelson doesn't want to upset Lisa and turns him down, and they, call him chicken and run away. Ironically, Nelson does go back later and join them, but that's where my mind went with this scene here. I'm not sure if there's any connection to it, but again, I've seen a lot of Simpsons, so. Alright, so that leads us to yet another subplot. I think you're catching on to the theme here. I'll talk about it in the conclusion, but there's a lot of kind of side stories in this issue. And this next side story revolves around Homer, and out of all the side stories, this one literally has no connection to the story, the main plot at all. So same thing, I'm going to kind of gloss over it here. Basically what happens is Homer shows up to Moe's, and he discovers that Moe's is closed early again. So he hears some voices coming from around back, so as he goes out back, he hears someone say, "I hereby call our secret club meeting to order." So naturally, he's nosy, he's going to bust in there. And he says, "What secret club?" And we get a nice Stonecutters reference from Moe. Says, geez, I forgot to put the no Homer sign on the door." So after they discuss a few things, we find out that this is a secret sarcasm and insult club. Moe goes on to explain that since Comic Book Guy croaked, the town ain't had much of it. So we get together twice a week and toss the old verbal hate ball around. And we see there's some prominent sarcastic members of Springfield there. We see Rich Texan, Moe, Agnes Skinner, Mr. Burns, Super Nintendo Chalmers, so as they trade some insults back and forth, Homer eventually is welcomed into the club, and then we get a few more pages, or I should say panels, of Moe, Homer, and Mr. Burns kind of trading barbs back and forth. And then at the conclusion of the meeting, Homer asks, "So, just to be clear, it's okay to insult each other?" And Burns says, "It's not just okay, it's mandatory." So the next day at the power plant, Homer's going to try to impress Lenny and Carl, so he goes up to Mr. Burns' office, And when he approaches them, he says, "I've seen prunes with smoother skin than yours. No one likes you, and you smell like Death's house." And of course, we get the classic, "What's the name of this fellow, Smithers?" "Homer Simpson, sir. He's one of these sluggards from Sector 7G. And then he fires Homer. Now, as Homer's walking out of the power plant with his belongings, Mr. Burns catches up to him and explains that he was just being sarcastic and that he still has a job, but just to keep things from getting confusing amongst the non-club members, you'd best stay at home for a month or so until all this is forgotten. And Homer says, "I guess a month of paid vacation isn't bad." And then we see a nice belly laugh from Burns. "Haha, paid vacation, another home run from the sarcasm king." And that kind of concludes Homer's little side plot there. Again, I'll discuss it more in detail later. The trend of side story jumping to another side story continues here into chapter 12 titled Game On. Again, I'll gloss over Bart's next round of knitting, where Milhouse shows up and Bart has knitted him a sweater. And he also tells Milhouse that he's knitted a select number of individuals at the stadium for the big football game similar sweaters. So we fast forward a few panels and we see Arnie Pie in the sky, up high in the blimp. And when he turns on the camera, we see that the people that he knitted sweaters for spells the word wiener with an arrow pointed to a yellow dot. And Arnie says, "This is amazing. The crowd seems to be spelling out a word and pointing an arrow with their clothing. Let's go to a close-up of who they are referring to. I'll aim a shotgun microphone at him as well." And naturally, we see Skinner up on the jumbo screen. "Bart Simpson!" Now, like I said, it's funny. Don't get me wrong. These little side stories are funny there, but we haven't really done anything with Comic Book Guy lately, so we'll kind of gloss over that there, and we'll get to the final chapter of this issue, which is chapter 13, titled Nerdier She Wrote. Now, for you youngins out there, you might not remember Murder, She Wrote, the classic Angela Lansbury show. Anyhow, Lisa has decided to go back to the cemetery to see if she can find any clues, but other than Ralph falling into a muddy, open grave, they come up empty-handed. So she decides that she should go question Comic Book Guy's quote-unquote friends. Now, I won't read all these panels, but you can see nobody has anything nice to say. And we get a nice collection of characters. We've got, I believe that's Cosine Tangent, the little genius from Springfield Elementary. Remember from Bart's Comet, he was part of the Super Friends group. I think that's him at least. Of course, you got Jasper and Gil and Horatio McAllister, the sea captain, Krabappel, Professor Frink, Duffman, Sideshow Mel, and the Crazy Cat Lady. Now, I do want to take a second and read Krabappel's panel because I've made some loose references to previous episodes, but this one has to be a direct reference. You see, it says, "After we broke up, he sent me a stack of hate mail." And they say, "Was it bad?" And she says, "Who knows? It was all written in Klingon." And you remember in season 15, My Big Fat Geek Wedding, Krabappel and Comic Book Guy are going to get married at a Comic-Con, and it's a Klingon-themed wedding. No coincidence that he's sending her hate mail after they break up written in Klingon. So kudos to Boothby on that one. That's a nice little connection there. They come up empty-handed at the Crazy Cat Lady's house because other than the cats licking Ralph's shoes, to which he sells the shoes to her, so he gets a few bucks, which they use to go to Krusty Burger because they're hungry. There we find Homer salivating at a bag, and he says, "I just heard on the news there's a new Krusty Burger sandwich." And you see Ralph look over and say, "A ribwich?" Homer says, "Better. It's so big you wear it around your neck. It's called a bibwich." Look at that thing. Rack of ribs with a burger on it. So then we see somebody curse, and we go over and we see Krusty with Raphael, the sarcastic clerk. And again, I've pointed out the milkshake machine in every episode, or every issue, because it does show up in every issue. So we see Krusty say, "Lousy milkshake machine, why aren't you working?" And Raphael replies, "Well, first of all, stop buying your equipment from countries that ain't had a industrial revolution yet. And secondly, something's clogging up the pipes." Then you see, naturally, Krusty, "Then crank it up and blow whatever it is out of there. You're the clown, boss." Meanwhile, Homer reaches over and asks how the mystery solving's going, and Lisa says, "Not good. We've talked to everyone, and there are no real leads."
And Ralph says, "It's too bad we can't just ask Comic Book Guy what happened to him."
And Homer decides, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking, Lisa?" And she says, "We keep using scientific deduction until we pare away everything but definitive conclusion?" And Homer says, "That's right, a seance." And Dad, I don't think, but before she can finish, Homer grabs Lisa and Ralph and they run out the door. And the final panel is a hand shooting up from the ground with Army of Darkness, a nice little reference to Bruce Campbell's Army of Darkness, which I don't think you guys can see. Let's see. I got my Army of Darkness poster up there, but it's kind of buried behind all the toys. But I really like that. That was kind of cool. And thus concludes issue number 4. And with that, issue number 4 comes to a close. Now, I mentioned in the audio that I have some conflicting opinions about this issue, so let's start with the good. All right, now I've talked about Boothby's writing, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. He does an amazing job of taking the characters from the show and putting them on the pages. It feels like you're just reading an episode. You know, he captures their essence, the dialogue, the interaction, the mannerisms perfectly, okay? And I think one of the other things that he does a great job with is, I don't think I've given him as much credit in the previous issues, is showing a lot of the side characters. I think one of the amazing things about The Simpsons is that they have so many, minor characters, but they appear so often that they feel like they're part of the main cast. I mean, obviously Moe and Barney and Lenny, Carl, Burns, there's so many, but when you see them in the show, you feel like that they belong there, right? They're not like their guest appearances or anything. So he does a good job in this issue. Continuing on, obviously we saw Gil and Duffman and Sideshow Mel and Superintendent Chalmers and things like that. So another plus for him in that category. The visuals, great. The artwork, colors, ink, lettering. There's nothing negative, or I should say visually displeasing about this issue or the entire series in general. And of course, there's plenty of geeky goodness in this book as well. Not as much as the previous issues, but there's still plenty of it. We got the Ghostbusters, the Ark of the Covenant, Batman Begins reference, those autobiographies. So there's that aspect that he continues from issue to issue. I think my biggest gripe with the issue is that, how do I put it? The story really doesn't advance much. In the previous issue, we were left questioning, is Comic Book Guy really dead? And Lisa can't quite put her finger on the answer. Well, at the end of this issue, we're still left wondering, is he really dead? And once again, Lisa can't quite put her finger on it. Okay? And I think one of the main reasons is because, well, it's not a spoiler, but other than one page and a couple panels, the plot doesn't really move forward at all. And you really don't know about those panels in the page until you read the next issue. So, you're left wondering, where did the story go? And one of the reasons why I suspect, at least, is that between Bart's 2 knitting segments, Homer's Insult Club, and that little section with Nelson, even though that's only like 1 page, that takes up 12 pages, roughly. Now, this is a 30-page book, which is awesome, given that most comics, especially now, you get 21, 22 pages, but that's over a third of the book dedicated to side stories. Now, the Bart knitting makes sense because we see in the previous issue he develops a love for it, and he really is going to town with it. So it makes sense that it shows up here. And I guess Nelson's little 1 page isn't that big of a deal, but Homer's 5 pages, roughly, of the Insult Club, I don't want to say filler, but it doesn't seem like they were going anywhere with that, because it doesn't show up in the previous issues, it doesn't show up in the final issue, so it's definitely an isolated kind of subplot. And they loosely tie it to Comic Book Guy's death because, there's no more insults or sarcasm in Springfield, but kind of a weak connection, if you ask me. I think they could have used those 5 pages to maybe Lisa and Bart explore the back room of the comic store and we see more cool memorabilia. Or they could have had a couple more of those autobiographies. I don't know, something along those lines. It's not to say that those weren't well written. I thought the Kick Me and the Wiener arrow that Bart knits is hilarious. And I thought if you go back and read the Insult Club, because I just kind of glossed over it there's plenty of panels where Moe and Homer and Mr. Burns are trading barbs back and forth. So it's still hilarious, don't get me wrong. It's just, I don't think they utilized those 5 pages the best they could have. Either way, I think the issue's still a very good issue. It's just probably the weakest of the 5. But I don't want to nitpick too much. We'll definitely pull it all together in the next issue, but that'll about do it for issue number 4 of Comic Book Guy. So if you have any questions or comments about this issue or just in general, go ahead and leave them down below. I'll try to get them as soon as I can. I apologize it's taken this long to get to issue number 4, but hey, better late than never, and I promise we will finish this off here pretty soon. But while you're down there, like and subscribe so you know when the next video comes out. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.